Dr. Elizabeth Anderson's weathered hands trembled as 6 massive lions formed a perfect circle around her in the heart of the Serengeti, their amber eyes fixed not on her, but on the dying cub she cradled against her chest. The silence stretched like a held breath across the African grassland. This wasn't supposed to happen. Lions don't spare humans who touch their young. Her 8-year-old granddaughter Grace pressed against the safari vehicle window, heart monitor beeping frantically as her congenital condition spiked with terror. Mike's camera shook violently in his hands, the lens capturing what might be his mother's final moments. The massive alpha female stepped closer, close enough that Beth could see her reflection in those ancient, knowing eyes. 30 years of animal behavior research had never prepared her for this. "Don't move, Mom," Mike whispered, his voice cracking like breaking glass. Would these lions remember the woman who had saved their ancestors 20 years ago, and could love truly transcend the wild boundaries between species? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The morning had begun with such promise, Dr. Elizabeth Anderson thought, as she watched the golden sunrise paint the Serengeti in shades of hope. At 62, she had finally convinced her fractured family to join her on what she secretly knew might be her last research expedition to Tanzania. The early-stage Alzheimer's diagnosis, carefully hidden in her Chicago apartment drawer, gave this trip an urgency her son Mike and granddaughter Grace couldn't possibly understand. Grace had insisted on coming despite her worsening heart condition, her 8-year-old spirit undaunted by the irregular beeping of her portable monitor. "Grandma Beth, I want to see your lions before," she had whispered, unable to finish the sentence that hung between them like morning mist. The child's congenital heart defect required surgery within 6 months. Surgery that would cost more than Mike's struggling photography career could afford, especially after his divorce, and battles with alcoholism had depleted their savings. Mike Thompson carried his professional camera equipment with the careful precision of a man trying to prove his worth to a mother who had always seemed more invested in African wildlife than her own son's welfare. The resentment in his 45-year-old eyes was as clear as the acacia trees dotting the landscape. For 30 years, he had watched Beth choose conference calls about lion behavior over his soccer games, research grants over family vacations, and now, most painfully, conservation funding over Grace's medical needs. "You've sent $50,000 a year to this place, Mom," Mike had confronted her just yesterday at the research station, "while Grace needs heart surgery and I'm losing my house. Your priorities have always been crystal clear." His voice carried the accumulated hurt of decades, the pain of a child who had learned too early that love could be conditional, distributed in careful measures between human family and wild creatures thousands of miles away. Beth's former colleague, Dr. James Mitchell, had welcomed them to the Serengeti Research Institute with the awkward enthusiasm of a man harboring 20 years of unspoken feelings. Jim had been her closest friend during her early career, before marriage and motherhood had pulled her back to Chicago's urban safety. His weathered face and gentle manner reminded her of paths not taken, choices that might have led to different kinds of heartbreak. The financial crisis loomed over everything like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Beth faced an impossible choice: liquidate her late husband's estate to pay for Grace's surgery, or continue funding the lion conservation project that had become her life's work. The irony wasn't lost on her. A woman who had spent decades studying family structures and lion prides had somehow failed to nurture the bonds within her own family. Grace, wise beyond her years and intuitive in the way that children facing mortality often are, seemed to understand the complex emotional ecosystem surrounding her. She had quietly researched her grandmother's work online, learning about lion behavior and conservation efforts with the dedication of a graduate student. Unknown to the adults, she had specific reasons for insisting on this dangerous journey, reasons that would soon transform everything they thought they knew about family, sacrifice, and the healing power of unconditional love. The argument erupted like a thunderclap across the research station's morning calm. Beth had just returned from her secret meeting with Jim Mitchell, where they had discussed expanding the Lion Protection Program, a conversation that would require another substantial financial commitment. Mike confronted her in the main tent, Grace's medical files spread across the table like accusations. 20 years, Mom. 20 goddamn years you've been funneling money to this place while your own family falls apart. Mike's voice shook with controlled fury as he held up bank statements he'd discovered in Beth's research bag. $50,000 annually. Do you have any idea what that money could have meant to us? Grace's surgery, my rehabilitation, keeping my house, all of it gone because you care more about lions than people? Beth's face flushed with a mixture of shame and defiance. You don't understand the bigger picture, Michael. These conservation efforts. The bigger picture? Mike slammed his fist on the wooden table, causing Grace's heart monitor to chirp in alarm. My daughter is dying, and you're worried about the bigger picture. These animals would survive just fine without your charity, but Grace won't survive without that surgery. Grace, pale but determined, stepped between them despite the concerning irregularity of her heart monitor's beeping. Stop fighting! I wanted to come here. Grandma's lions are important too. Her small voice carried a weight that silenced both adults, but Mike's anger was too deep to be quelled by his daughter's intervention. Important. Mike turned to his daughter with anguish in his eyes. Gracie, your grandmother has been choosing animals over family since I was your age. She missed my graduation, my wedding, even my father's funeral because of some critical research deadline. And now she's literally taking money from your medical fund to feed her obsession. The words hung in the African air like smoke from a grass fire. Beth's composure cracked, revealing decades of buried guilt. I never meant for it to be a choice between... Her explanation was cut short by a sound that pierced through their human drama, the desperate, keening cry of a lion cub in distress. The call came from the acacia grove beyond the research station, a plaintive wail that spoke of abandonment and approaching death. Jim Mitchell appeared at the tent entrance, his face grave. That cub has been crying for over 24 hours. The pride moved on during the night, probably forced away by territorial males, if the mother doesn't return soon. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Beth's professional instincts kicked in immediately. How far from water? Too far. And there are signs of infection. We spotted blood on the rocks where it's been trying to climb. Jim's voice carried the weight of someone who had witnessed too many such tragedies. Then we have to help, Grace said simply, her child's logic cutting through the complexity of conservation ethics. Absolutely not. Mike stepped protectively in front of his daughter. We're not risking our lives for another one of Mom's animal rescue missions. Grace, your heart can't handle this kind of stress. But Beth was already moving, gathering emergency veterinary supplies from the research station's medical kit. Some things are more important than rules, son. Grace taught me that when she decided to come here despite her heart condition. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Mike's frustration boiled over. You're about to violate every conservation principle you've ever preached, risk all our lives, and for what? One cub that nature has already selected against? The cub's cry came again, weaker this time, and Grace made a decision that would change everything. She walked toward the tent entrance, her small frame silhouetted against the African morning light. Daddy, you taught me that when someone needs help, you help them. Even if it's scary, even if it's dangerous. Mike looked between his dying daughter and his obsessed mother, seeing for the first time the genetic thread of stubbornness and compassion that connected all three generations. Grace's heart monitor showed elevated stress, but her determination was absolute. Fine, Mike said finally. shouldering his camera equipment with resignation. "But I'm documenting everything. When this goes wrong, and it will go wrong, I want evidence of the moment our family officially lost its collective mind." As they prepared to leave the safety of the research station, none of them could have predicted that their decision to save one abandoned cub would lead them into an encounter that would challenge everything they believed about intelligence, memory, and the bonds that transcend species. The morning sun climbed higher as they set out toward the grove, toward a confrontation with the wild that would test not only their courage, but the very foundation of their fractured family relationships. The acacia grove felt eerily silent as they approached, the only sound Grace's heart monitor maintaining its irregular rhythm against the backdrop of African wilderness. Beth moved with practiced caution, her veterinary training from decades past guiding each step toward the source of the weakening cries. Mike followed reluctantly, his camera capturing their advance while his eyes constantly checked on Grace, who insisted on staying close despite her obvious fatigue. The lion cub lay beneath a fallen branch, barely moving except for the labored rise and fall of its small chest. Beth knelt beside the animal, her experienced hands immediately assessing the damage: severe dehydration, an infected wound on its left hind leg, and the telltale signs of abandonment that marked certain death without intervention. "Oh my God," Beth whispered, her voice carrying a tremor that had nothing to do with fear. As she lifted the cub gently, examining it more closely, she saw something that made her hands shake with recognition. The animal's eyes, when they fluttered open briefly, were an unusual pale blue, a rare genetic mutation she had documented extensively 20 years earlier during her first research expedition to this exact region. "Grandma, what's wrong?" Grace asked, noticing the sudden change in Beth's demeanor. The child moved closer, her own small hands reaching out to touch the cub's matted fur. "These eyes. I've seen them before," Beth murmured, more to herself than to her family. "This genetic marker, it's incredibly rare. I studied this mutation in detail when you were just a baby, Mike. The blue eyes only appear in lions from a very specific bloodline." Mike lowered his camera, studying his mother's face with growing concern. "Mom, you're scaring me." "What bloodline?" Before Beth could answer, the silence of the grove was shattered by the sound of movement in the tall grass surrounding them. Not the rustle of wind or small animals, but the deliberate, coordinated movement of large predators. Mike's breath caught in his throat as he slowly raised his camera, the telephoto lens revealing what his naked eyes couldn't yet process. 6 adult lions emerged from their concealment with the fluid grace of apex predators. The massive alpha male, his dark mane indicating full maturity and dominance, positioned himself directly ahead of their small group. 5 lionesses flanked him, their movements synchronized with the precision of a military unit. This wasn't a chance encounter. It was a calculated approach. "Nobody move," Beth whispered urgently, though her voice carried an undertone that Mike couldn't identify. Was it fear, or something else entirely? Grace pressed closer to her grandmother, the beeping of her heart monitor accelerating with stress, but she showed no signs of panic. The alpha female, clearly the pride's matriarch, stepped forward with deliberate purpose, her amber eyes fixed not on the humans as potential threats, but on the cub in Beth's arms. Mike watched through his camera lens as the lioness's behavior defied everything he thought he knew about wild animal reactions. Instead of aggression or territorial warning, her posture suggested something impossible: recognition. "Grandma," Grace whispered, her child's intuition grasping something the adults were struggling to process. "They know you." The lioness approached within 10 feet of Beth, closer than any wild lion should tolerate human presence. Her massive head tilted slightly as she studied Beth's face with an intensity that seemed almost human in its focus. Then, in a behavior that Mike's camera captured in stunning detail, the lioness lowered her head in what could only be described as a greeting. "This isn't possible," Mike breathed, his professional skepticism warring with the evidence before his eyes. "Wild lions don't behave this way. They don't recognize individual humans after—" He stopped mid-sentence as understanding began to dawn. Beth's voice was barely audible as she spoke to the lioness as if greeting an old friend. "Sage, is that really you?" The lioness responded with a low, rumbling vocalization, not a growl of warning but something softer, almost conversational. The other Pride members began to settle into resting positions around the small clearing, their body language indicating complete comfort with the human presence. The alpha male, whom Beth now addressed as Thunder, stretched out in the shade with the casual ease of a house cat, his massive size somehow less threatening in repose. "Mom," Mike's voice carried a mixture of awe and growing comprehension. "How do you know these lions' names?" Grace, despite her heart condition causing irregular beeping from her monitor, seemed the least surprised by the extraordinary scene unfolding around them. She reached out slowly toward the cub in Beth's arms, and when her small fingers made contact with its fur, the animal's eyes opened fully, revealing those striking blue irises. "20 years ago," Beth began, her voice thick with emotion, "when I was conducting my doctoral research here, there was a terrible drought. An entire pride was dying, cubs, adults, everyone. The local authorities gave me permission to intervene, to hand-raise the cubs until the rains returned." She looked around at the lions surrounding them with evident affection. "These aren't just any lions. They're family." The alpha female moved closer still, her massive head now within arm's reach of Beth. In a gesture that made Mike's hands tremble as he filmed, the lioness began to gently groom Beth's free hand with her rough tongue, the same nurturing behavior reserved for Pride members. "You bottle-fed them," Mike said, understanding flooding his voice. "That's where the money has been going, not just to conservation research, but to protecting this specific pride." Grace smiled weakly despite her physical distress. "I knew it. I researched your work online, Grandma. You didn't abandon these lions 20 years ago. You've been watching over them ever since." The healing process began with the delicate precision of a field surgery as Beth opened her emergency veterinary kit, her movements watched intently by 6 pairs of amber eyes. Grace insisted on helping, despite the concerning irregularity of her heart monitor, her small hands steady as she held gauze while Beth cleaned the cub's infected wound. The lions maintained their protective circle, their behavior defying every textbook on wild animal psychology that Mike had ever read. "Hand me the antiseptic, sweetheart," Beth murmured to Grace, whose pale complexion had gained a slight flush of color since they'd encountered the pride. The child's heart condition seemed somehow stabilized by the presence of the lions, her monitor's beeping settling into a more regular rhythm that puzzled even her grandmother's medical training. As they worked, Beth began to share the story she had kept hidden for 2 decades. The drought of 2003 had been catastrophic, turning the Serengeti into a graveyard of bones and dust. She had been a young researcher then, newly widowed and desperate to prove herself in a field dominated by men who questioned her emotional attachment to her subjects. "Your grandfather had just died of cancer," Beth told Mike, her voice carrying the weight of old grief as she sutured the cub's wound. "I came here because I couldn't bear to be in Chicago, surrounded by memories and sympathy cards. I thought I was running away from death, but instead, I found myself in the middle of the worst natural disaster this region had seen in 50 years. The Pride matriarch, Sage, had been barely weaned when Beth found her dying beside her mother's body. Thunder, the current alpha male, had been even smaller, a week-old cub whose eyes hadn't yet opened. Through the camera lens, Mike watched his mother's hands move with practiced care, the same gentleness he dimly remembered from his own childhood illnesses, though those memories had been overshadowed by years of perceived neglect. "You hand-raised them," Mike said, lowering his camera as understanding continued to unfold. "That's why they recognize you. That's why they're not afraid." "For 8 months," Beth confirmed, applying a bandage to the cub's leg with Grace's careful assistance. "Until the rains came back and I could release them back to the wild. But lions don't forget, Michael. They remember kindness the same way they remember threats." Jim Mitchell arrived with his research team just as Beth finished treating the cub, his expression shifting from concern to amazement as he witnessed the unprecedented scene. "Elizabeth, in 20 years of studying this pride, I've never seen them allow humans this close. They've always been uniquely tolerant, but this," he gestured at the lions lounging peacefully around the family, "this is beyond anything documented in behavioral literature." The revelation that followed hit Mike like a physical blow. Jim explained that the annual $50,000 Beth had been sending wasn't funding generic conservation efforts. It was specifically protecting this pride and their descendants from poaching, habitat encroachment, and human-wildlife conflict. Every dollar had gone toward ranger salaries, veterinary care, and creating buffer zones around their territory. "I've been protecting my family," Beth said simply, cradling the now bandaged cub against her chest. "All of my family, human and lion alike." Grace, wise beyond her 8 years, spoke with the clarity that sometimes comes to children facing mortality. "Grandma, you've been taking care of everyone your whole life." "Who takes care of you?" The question hung in the air like morning mist, exposing the loneliness that Beth had carried for decades. Mike felt his anger beginning to transform into something more complex, understanding mixed with regret, admiration, tempered by grief for the lost years between them. Through his camera, he had documented his mother's gentle care for the injured cub, movements that mirrored exactly how she had tended to him during a childhood bout with pneumonia, a memory he had buried beneath layers of resentment. As the sun climbed higher, the family found themselves settling into an extraordinary overnight vigil. Grace's condition required rest, so they made camp in the clearing surrounded by lions who took turns standing guard. Mike filmed the surreal scene of his daughter sleeping peacefully between a lion cub and his mother, both invalids finding comfort in each other's warmth. During the quiet hours, Sage and Thunder shared something unprecedented with the research team: detailed information about territorial boundaries, watering holes, and migration patterns, communicated through vocalizations and behavior that Jim recognized as complex interspecies communication. This intelligence led to a disturbing discovery: fresh tracks and camouflaged equipment indicating a sophisticated poaching operation targeting this exact pride. "They're not just hunting for sport," Jim explained grimly as he examined GPS coordinates on his tablet. "This is systematic elimination. Someone wants this entire bloodline extinct." The emotional breakthrough came near midnight when Grace's heart monitor briefly flatlined, sending everyone into panic. As Beth performed emergency CPR on her granddaughter, the lions moved closer, Sage beginning a low, rhythmic purring that seemed to vibrate through the ground. Medical literature had documented the healing effects of feline purring frequencies on human cardiac function, but witnessing it firsthand defied rational explanation. Grace's heart resumed beating, her vital signs stabilizing in a way that seemed to correlate directly with the lion's presence. Mike watched through tears as his mother worked to save his daughter, understanding for the first time that Beth's dedication to healing, whether human or animal, came from the same fierce love that had driven her to choose career over conventional motherhood. "I spent 30 years angry that you loved animals more than me," Mike whispered to his mother as Grace slept peacefully between them. But watching Grace with these lions, seeing how you've protected them all these years, you taught her to love fearlessly. You taught us both. The night brought more revelations as Beth shared the depth of her sacrifice. The money for conservation hadn't come from Grace's medical fund. It had come from slowly selling her late mother's jewelry collection piece by piece over 2 decades. Her own inheritance, her security, her retirement fund, all of it invested in protecting the pride that had given her purpose when grief threatened to destroy her. "You've been selling Grandma Sarah's pearls?" Mike asked, remembering the elegant jewelry that had once been his grandmother's pride. "The last piece went 3 months ago," Beth admitted. "But it was worth it. Every pearl, every gold bracelet, every ring, it all went to keep this family safe." Jim's research team worked through the night, using the Lions' intelligence about poaching activities to map a network of illegal operations spanning multiple countries. The Pride had been observing and learning about human threats for years, developing an understanding of danger that went far beyond typical animal awareness. As dawn approached, the family had become something unprecedented, a hybrid pride of humans and lions, united by bonds that transcended species. Grace's condition had stabilized remarkably, her heart function showing improvement that would be difficult to explain to medical professionals back in Chicago. Mike's resentment continued to dissolve as he witnessed his mother's complete integration with the Pride. These weren't just animals she studied, they were relationships she had nurtured across decades, connections that had sustained her through widowhood, loneliness, and the gradual distance that had grown between her and her human family. The Lions' trust in Beth extended to accepting Grace and Mike, creating a moment of unity that 20 years of family therapy couldn't have achieved. As Mike filmed the sunrise painting the Serengeti Gold, he realized he was documenting more than just an extraordinary animal encounter. He was capturing the healing of 3 generations of misunderstanding, the moment when love revealed its true nature as something that expands rather than divides. Thunder's deep rumble of contentment as he watched over the sleeping Grace seemed to echo Beth's own sense of completion. For the first time in decades, her 2 families, human and lion, were together, safe and unified in their love for each other. The dawn tranquility shattered with the distinctive thrum of helicopter rotors cutting through the morning air. Mike's camera jerked upward, capturing the sleek black aircraft approaching from the east, its unmarked exterior and military-grade equipment immediately setting off alarm bells in Jim's experienced mind. The Lions reacted instantly, their peaceful demeanor transforming into high alert as Thunder rose to his full imposing height, his massive frame positioned protectively between the aircraft and the family. "That's not a Park Service helicopter!" Jim shouted over the increasing noise, his hand instinctively reaching for the emergency radio. "No authorized flights in this sector today." The helicopter touched down 50 yards away, kicking up clouds of red dust that forced everyone to shield their eyes. 3 men emerged, their tactical gear and professional movements suggesting military or mercenary background. The leader, a weathered man in his 50s with the bearing of someone accustomed to command, approached with calculated confidence while his companions flanked him with weapons clearly visible. "Dr. Elizabeth Anderson," the man called out, his South African accent thick with authority and something darker, personal pain twisted into purpose. "I'm Marcus Vanderberg. We need to have a conversation about your lions." Beth instinctively pulled Grace closer while clutching the injured cub, her maternal instincts flaring as she recognized the threat in Marcus's tone. The Pride moved into defensive formation around them, Sage's warning growl rumbling low and dangerous as she assessed the armed intruders. "Mr. Vanderberg," Jim stepped forward, trying to position himself between the family and the poachers. "This is a protected research area. You have no authority here." Marcus smiled, but the expression held no warmth. Authority comes from different sources, Dr. Mitchell. Sometimes it comes from badges and permits. Sometimes it comes from law so profound it reshapes a man's entire purpose. His eyes fixed on Grace, and something flickered across his face. Recognition, pain, and a terrible resolve. "You want these lions eliminated," Beth said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "But why this pride specifically? They've never attacked humans. They've actually protected people." "Because they're an anomaly," Marcus replied, his voice carrying decades of accumulated rage. "Lions that don't fear humans are dangerous. Lions that interact with humans upset the natural order. And when that order breaks down, people die." His hand moved unconsciously to touch something at his chest. A locket, Mike realized, focusing his camera lens. The impossible choice crystallized with brutal clarity as Marcus issued his ultimatum. "I know about your research, Dr. Anderson. 20 years of data on lion behavior, territory maps, migration patterns, breeding records. You're going to give me the location of every pride you've studied, every family group under your protection. Or I'm going to start with this one, beginning with the cub in your arms." Grace's heart monitor began beeping erratically, the stress of the situation triggering dangerous arrhythmia. Beth felt the child's small body trembling against her as the medical device's alarms grew more insistent. Mike's camera captured the agonizing moment when Beth realized she faced a choice no grandmother should ever confront: the safety of her granddaughter versus the lives of the lions she'd protected for decades. "You have 1 minute to decide," Marcus continued, his men raising their weapons with practiced efficiency. "The research data, or I demonstrate what happens to lions who get too comfortable around humans." Beth's early Alzheimer's symptoms, exacerbated by extreme stress, began manifesting at the worst possible moment. The carefully organized mental files of her research data, GPS coordinates, pride locations, behavioral patterns, became scrambled and inaccessible. She pressed her hands to her temples, struggling to access information that seemed to slip away like water through her fingers. I can't remember," she whispered, genuine confusion clouding her eyes. "The coordinates, the data, it's all mixed up." Mike lowered his camera, finally understanding the full scope of his mother's condition. "Mom?" The single word carried 30 years of regret and newfound protectiveness. "She's sick," Grace said, with the brutal honesty of childhood, her own medical condition making her acutely aware of others' health struggles. "Her brain is getting fuzzy, like mine does when my heart acts up." Marcus studied Beth's obvious distress, his tactical experience recognizing genuine medical crisis versus deception. The moment of hesitation cost him his advantage as Mike stepped forward, his photographer's courage finally matching his mother's lifelong bravery. "You want those lions?" Mike's voice carried new strength, the same determination that had driven Beth to hand-raise cubs in the wilderness. "You go through us first." Grace, despite her heart condition sending her monitor into alarmed beeping, summoned the fierce spirit that ran in their family bloodline. "Mr. Badman, these lions are our family now. You can't hurt family." Beth, fighting through the fog of her compromised memory, found clarity in the faces of her loved ones, human and lion alike. "I may be forgetting everything else, but I'll never forget what love looks like." The pride faced their ultimate test as Marcus signaled his men to prepare for elimination protocols. Against every documented pattern of animal behavior, the lions chose protection over flight. Sage positioned herself directly between Grace and the armed men, her massive body becoming a living shield. Thunder's roar shattered the morning air, a sound of pure defiance that seemed to echo across the entire Serengeti. The battle that followed would be captured in its entirety by Mike's still-rolling camera. Grace, despite her dangerous heart condition, used her extensive research into lion communication to warn the pride of flanking movements, her child's voice calling out warnings in sounds that the lions immediately understood and responded to. Mike's years of photographing dangerous situations translated into unexpected tactical awareness, his knowledge of light and shadow helping coordinate movements with Jim's research team as they used emergency flares and vehicle positioning to confuse the attackers. The turning point came when Grace, her small heart pushed beyond safe limits by adrenaline and determination, ran directly into the line of fire to protect the injured cub that had started their entire journey. Her act of selfless courage, a 8-year-old child with a failing heart risking everything for an animal she'd known for barely 24 hours, shattered something fundamental in Marcus's worldview. "Sarah," he whispered, the name torn from his lips as he watched Grace's bravery. The locket at his chest contained a photo of his daughter, a daughter who had died not from lion attack as he'd claimed, but from the same congenital heart condition that now threatened Grace's life. His weapon lowered as memories crashed over him. Sarah's last words about not hating the animals, her dreams of becoming a veterinarian, her gentle spirit that had somehow produced a father consumed by misdirected revenge. In Grace's courage, he saw everything he had lost and forgotten about his own child's beautiful heart. Grace collapsed moments after her act of heroism, her small body crumpling to the dusty ground as her heart monitor erupted in a cacophony of alarms that seemed to echo across the entire Serengeti. The electronic beeping became erratic, then accelerated to a dangerous pace that made Beth's medical training kick into overdrive, despite her Alzheimer's-induced confusion. Mike dropped his camera, the expensive equipment forgotten as he rushed to his daughter's side, his hands trembling as he checked her pulse. "She's going into cardiac arrest," Beth announced with clinical precision, though her voice cracked with grandmotherly terror. The nearest hospital was over 200 miles away through terrain that would take hours to navigate, and Grace's condition required immediate intervention that was impossible in the African wilderness. The portable defibrillator in their emergency kit had been damaged during the confrontation, leaving them helpless as the child who had brought their family together lay dying in the red dust. Beth's Alzheimer's symptoms worsened dramatically under the extreme stress, her carefully maintained cognitive functions collapsing like a house of cards. She began forgetting where they were, who Grace was, even basic medical procedures that had been second nature for decades. Mike watched in horror as his mother, the brilliant scientist who had dedicated her life to healing, stared blankly at the medical equipment she no longer remembered how to use. "Mom, please," Mike begged, cradling Grace's unconscious form while tears streamed down his face. "You have to remember. You're the only one who can help her." But Beth's eyes held the frightening vacancy of advancing dementia, accelerated by trauma into territory that made her previous symptoms seem mild by comparison. Marcus stood frozen 20 feet away, his weapon hanging uselessly at his side as he watched the scene unfold. The sight of Grace, so similar to his own daughter in her courage and fragility, triggered memories he had spent 3 years trying to suppress. Sarah had collapsed exactly like this during her final days, her small heart simply unable to sustain the enthusiasm and love that had defined her short life. The lions maintained their protective circle, but even their presence couldn't alter the brutal reality of cardiac failure in a child. Sage's gentle purring, which had seemed to stabilize Grace's condition earlier, now felt inadequate against the magnitude of her medical crisis. Thunder's massive frame cast a shadow over the dying child, his amber eyes reflecting a grief that seemed almost human in its depth. Jim's radio crackled with static as he desperately tried to reach emergency services, but the storm system moving across East Africa had disrupted communications throughout the region, Even if they could establish contact, no medical helicopter could reach them through the approaching weather front. The family faced the horrible reality that Grace might die in her grandmother's arms in the middle of nowhere, her dreams of becoming a veterinarian buried with her in African soil. "I can't lose her," Mike whispered, his voice breaking as he held his daughter's cooling hand. "She's all I have left that's pure and good in this world. Everything else, my marriage, my career, my relationship with Mom, it's all been broken. But Grace was going to fix everything." Beth's lucid moments came in brief flashes between the fog of her deteriorating condition. During one such moment of clarity, she looked down at Grace's pale face and spoke with the wisdom of a woman who had spent her life studying the bonds between mothers and their young. "Grace isn't dying because we came here, Michael. She's living because we found what matters most: each other." The weather crisis intensified as the storm system arrived ahead of schedule, grounding any possibility of emergency evacuation. Winds whipped across the Serengeti with increasing violence, turning the red dust into a stinging cloud that forced everyone to seek shelter among the acacia trees. The family huddled together as Grace's condition continued to deteriorate, her breathing becoming more labored with each passing minute. Marcus slowly approached the family, his hardened mercenary exterior cracking under the weight of his own suppressed grief. "My daughter," he said quietly, his South African accent thick with emotion. "She died of the same condition. At home, surrounded by the best doctors money could buy, and they still couldn't save her." Mike looked up at the man who had threatened to kill them all just hours earlier, seeing not a monster but a father destroyed by loss. "How do you live with it?" Mike asked, his question carrying the weight of anticipatory grief. "You don't," Marcus replied honestly, kneeling beside Grace's still form. "You become something else entirely, something angry and broken and dangerous." He touched the locket at his chest, the silver warm from his body heat. "But watching your daughter's courage today, maybe there's another way to honor them. Maybe there's still time to choose love instead of revenge." The approaching storm made any rescue attempt impossible, trapping them all, family, lions, and former enemies, in a crucible of grief that would either destroy them completely or forge them into something stronger than any of them had been alone. Against every medical prediction and the grim expectations of everyone present, Grace's heart rhythm began to stabilize as the storm raged around them. The phenomenon defied rational explanation, but Jim's decades of research had documented instances of feline purring frequencies creating therapeutic effects on human cardiovascular systems. Sage had positioned herself directly against Grace's chest, her deep rhythmic purring creating vibrations that seemed to synchronize with the child's faltering heartbeat, slowly coaxing it back to a sustainable rhythm. "This is impossible," Mike whispered, watching his daughter's color gradually return from the gray pallor of cardiac distress to something approaching normal. The heart monitor, miraculously still functioning despite the chaos, showed readings that would have been considered medically improbable. Grace's vital signs weren't just improving, they were stabilizing at levels better than they had been in months. Marcus watched the scene unfold with tears streaming down his weathered face, his hand clutching the locket containing his daughter's photograph. The sight of Grace responding to the lion's presence triggered a devastating revelation that had been buried under 3 years of misdirected rage. "Sarah wasn't killed by lions," he said suddenly, his voice barely audible above the storm winds. "She died exactly like this, heart failure in her sleep. I blamed the lions because I couldn't accept that some things just happen, that sometimes there's no one to fight, no enemy to destroy." The confession hung in the air like the dust swirling around them, transforming Marcus from the vengeful hunter they had feared into a broken father seeking redemption. Jim's research team emerged from their shelter as Grace's condition continued to improve, documenting what would later be recognized as a breakthrough in understanding the therapeutic relationship between large cats and cardiac patients. The frequency of a lion's purr, Jim explained with scientific wonder, it's almost identical to the vibrations used in advanced cardiac therapy. We've suspected for years that there might be healing properties, but this is the first documented case of a wild lion essentially performing emergency cardiac intervention on a human child. Beth's Alzheimer's symptoms showed signs of improvement as her stress levels decreased with Grace's recovery. The fog of confusion that had clouded her mind during the crisis began to lift, revealing a truth she had kept hidden even from herself. "The Alzheimer's diagnosis," she said slowly, her voice gaining strength. "It was real, but the progression, I may have exaggerated the severity to bring us all together. I knew Grace's condition was worsening, knew Mike was struggling, and I was terrified of losing what little family I had left." Mike stared at his mother with a mixture of amazement and exasperation. "You manipulated us into coming here?" "I orchestrated an intervention," Beth corrected, her scientific mind reasserting itself as her cognitive function improved. "I've been watching our family fall apart for years. Your alcoholism, the divorce, Grace's worsening health, the growing distance between all of us. When I learned about the therapeutic potential of lion interaction from Jim's preliminary research, I saw an opportunity to heal more than just Grace's heart." The revelation recontextualized everything that had happened. Grace's insistence on making the dangerous journey, Beth's financial sacrifices for lion conservation, even the timing of their encounter with the pride. All of it had been carefully orchestrated by a grandmother desperate to save her fractured family before time ran out. Jim produced a satellite phone that had been protected from the storm's electromagnetic interference, establishing contact with a medical evacuation team in Nairobi. The cardiac specialist who reviewed Grace's transmitted vital signs expressed amazement at her improvement, confirming that her heart function had stabilized to levels that would extend her surgery timeline by months rather than weeks. Marcus made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Pulling out his own communication equipment, he contacted Tanzanian wildlife authorities and confessed to his poaching operation, providing coordinates and evidence that would lead to the arrest of an international smuggling ring. "Sarah always said she wanted to be a veterinarian," he told Grace, who was now conscious and alert. "Maybe the best way to honor her memory is to protect the animals she loved instead of destroying them." The financial miracle came through Mike's continuous filming throughout their ordeal. His camera had captured unprecedented footage of human-lion interaction, medical intervention by wild animals, and a family's emotional healing in real time. National Geographic's emergency contact confirmed a buyout offer of $500,000 for exclusive rights to the story, more than enough to cover Grace's surgery costs and fund Beth's conservation work for years to come. Grace, with the wisdom that often comes to children who have faced mortality, revealed her own carefully hidden agenda. "I researched lion therapy for heart patients online," she admitted, her small voice carrying the weight of an 8-year-old who had taken control of her own medical destiny. "I found studies about purring frequencies and cardiac function. I knew coming here might help my heart, but I also knew it would help our family." The pride's secret became clear through Jim's translation of their behavior patterns. These lions had 30 years of documented positive human interaction, making them uniquely suited for the therapeutic relationship that had just saved Grace's life. They were descendants of the cubs Beth had hand-raised, and their genetic memory had preserved not just her scent and voice, but an understanding of humans as potential allies rather than threats. "You've been conducting the world's first long-term study of interspecies therapeutic bonding without even realizing it," Jim told Beth as they prepared to leave the grove. This pride has learned to identify humans in medical distress and respond with healing behavior. Grace isn't their first success. There have been other incidents over the years that we attributed to coincidence. Beth's final confession brought the emotional journey full circle. I wasn't trying to choose animals over family, Michael. I was trying to find a way to save everyone I love. The lions who taught me about unconditional love, the granddaughter who reminded me what that love feels like, and the son who needed to see that love in action. As the storm began to clear and rescue helicopters appeared on the horizon, the family that had arrived in Tanzania, broken and distant, found themselves unified by an experience that transcended every boundary they had believed existed between human and animal, between science and emotion, between the love that divides and the love that heals. The lions began to move away as the human rescuers approached, but Sage paused beside Grace one final time, gently touching the child's hand with her massive paw in what could only be interpreted as a farewell blessing from one survivor to another. 1 year later, the same acacia grove that had witnessed their family's transformation buzzed with activity as Grace Anderson Thompson, now 9 years old and radiating health, addressed an international medical conference via satellite link from the heart of the Serengeti. Her heart function had not only stabilized but improved so dramatically that surgery was no longer necessary. A medical outcome that cardiac specialists worldwide were studying with fascination and hope. Sometimes the best medicine isn't in hospitals, Grace told the gathered doctors and researchers, her voice carrying across continents through the miracle of modern technology. Sometimes it's in the wild hearts that teach us how to be brave. Behind her, the Pride lounged peacefully in the afternoon shade, living proof of the therapeutic bond that had revolutionized both conservation science and cardiac care. Beth stood beside her granddaughter, her Alzheimer's symptoms having stabilized remarkably since the family crisis that had brought them together. The stress-induced progression of her condition had reversed with the resolution of her emotional trauma, and new research suggested that purposeful engagement with meaningful work could significantly slow cognitive decline. She had become the world's leading expert on interspecies therapeutic relationships, her 20-year longitudinal study now recognized as groundbreaking medical research. Mike, 18 months sober and remarried to Dr. Sarah Martinez, a wildlife veterinarian he had met while documenting their story, adjusted his camera to capture the perfect shot of 3 generations united under the African sky. His documentary about their experience had won numerous awards and generated millions in funding for both lion conservation and pediatric cardiac research. More importantly, it had reconciled him with his mother in ways that decades of therapy never could have achieved. Grace's baby brother, 6-month-old David, slept peacefully in a carrier on Beth's back, already accustomed to the sounds of the African wilderness that had become their second home. The family now split their time between Chicago and Tanzania, with Grace enrolled in a unique homeschooling program that allowed her to participate in ongoing research while maintaining her American education. Marcus Vanderberg had undergone his own remarkable transformation, trading his weapons for cameras as he documented anti-poaching efforts across East Africa. His inside knowledge of smuggling networks had led to the arrest of over 50 poachers and the dismantling of 3 major ivory trading operations. He had established the Sarah Memorial Foundation in his daughter's honor, funding veterinary training for local communities and creating sustainable alternatives to poaching for impoverished families. Watching Grace fight for life taught me something my daughter tried to tell me before she died, Marcus shared with the conference audience during his portion of the presentation. Love isn't about controlling outcomes or preventing loss. It's about choosing hope, even when hope seems impossible. The Grace's Pride Foundation, established with the proceeds from Mike's documentary, had become a model for conservation organizations worldwide. The foundation combined lion protection with cutting-edge medical research, demonstrating that environmental conservation and human health were inextricably linked. Local communities had embraced the program enthusiastically, as it provided steady employment for former poachers while protecting the wildlife that had become central to their economic survival. Dr. James Mitchell, now Beth's research partner and romantic companion, presented their latest findings to the medical conference with barely contained excitement. Their data showed that specific feline purring frequencies could regulate heart rhythms in patients with various cardiac conditions, opening entirely new avenues for non-invasive cardiac therapy. Clinical trials were beginning in children's hospitals across 3 continents, with Grace serving as the inspiration and poster child for the revolutionary treatment. The scientific community had initially greeted their findings with skepticism, but the overwhelming evidence made denial impossible. Grace's complete cardiac recovery, documented through rigorous medical monitoring, had convinced even the most conservative researchers that interspecies therapeutic bonding deserved serious investigation. The implications extended far beyond cardiac care, with applications being explored for PTSD treatment, autism therapy, and geriatric depression. As the formal presentation concluded, Grace led the conference participants on a virtual tour of the research station, introducing them to each member of the Pride with the enthusiasm of a child showing off beloved pets. Sage, now a protective aunt figure to Grace, demonstrated the specific purring patterns that had saved the child's life, her massive form radiating the calm strength that had become synonymous with healing. "This is Sage," Grace explained to her worldwide audience, her small hand resting confidently on the lioness's flank. "She's the one who taught my heart how to beat properly again. She has 3 cubs of her own now, and they're learning to help people too." Thunder, the Pride's alpha male, had become an unlikely ambassador for human-lion coexistence, his gentle interaction with visitors helping to change perceptions about predator conservation. His presence in educational videos had reached millions of viewers, transforming him from a potentially dangerous wild animal into a symbol of the healing power of nature. The research station had expanded into a world-class facility attracting scientists, medical professionals, and conservationists from around the globe. The waiting list for research positions extended 2 years, and the economic impact on local communities had been transformative. Former cattle herders had become skilled research assistants, their traditional knowledge of animal behavior proving invaluable to modern scientific methods. Grace's own transformation was perhaps the most remarkable of all. From a sickly child facing life-threatening surgery, she had become a confident young researcher with plans to attend veterinary school and eventually take over her grandmother's work. Her natural ability to communicate with the lions had made her an essential part of the research team, her insights often leading to breakthrough discoveries. As the conference call ended and evening approached, the family gathered around their traditional sunset campfire, the same spot where their crisis had transformed into healing 1 year earlier. Grace curled up against Beth, her heart monitor, now worn more for research purposes than medical necessity, showing the strong, steady rhythm of perfect cardiac health. "Grandma," Grace asked, her voice drowsy with contentment, "will the lions remember us when we're old?" Beth smiled, her arms encircling both Grace and baby David as Mike captured the moment through his lens. "Baby, love leaves tracks that never fade. And some kinds of love, the kind that changes everything, the kind that heals hearts and builds bridges between species, that kind of love becomes part of who we are forever." Marcus approached their fire circle, carrying a small wrapped package. Inside was a locket similar to the one he wore containing his daughter's picture, but this one held a photograph of Grace and Sage together, their foreheads touching in a gesture of perfect trust and understanding. "For when you become a veterinarian," he told Grace, his voice thick with emotion, "to remind you that healing comes in many forms, and sometimes the best medicine is simply refusing to give up on love." As the African stars emerged in the darkening sky, the pride settled around their human family for another peaceful night, proving once again that love indeed leaves tracks that never fade. Sometimes we spend our whole lives believing we have to choose between our passions and our family, between following our hearts and meeting expectations. Beth Anderson thought she had failed as a mother because she chose conservation over conventional motherhood, yet her granddaughter Grace saw something different. A woman who taught love without conditions, who showed that caring extends beyond bloodlines to embrace all living creatures. When Grace's heart was failing, it wasn't medical technology that saved her, but the healing power of connections that transcend species, boundaries, and time itself. The lions that Beth had nurtured 20 years earlier returned that love when her family needed it most, proving that kindness creates ripples across generations. Marcus discovered that revenge had robbed him of precious years, but it wasn't too late to honor his daughter's memory through protection instead of destruction. This story reminds us that our deepest regrets often mask our greatest gifts, that the love we think we've failed to give properly has actually been building bridges we never knew existed. Family isn't just about shared DNA, it's about showing up when someone needs healing, about choosing hope over fear, and believing that love always finds a way home. What family relationship in your life could benefit from a fresh perspective? Have you ever discovered that what you thought was a weakness was actually your greatest strength? Share your thoughts below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.